Okay, can you see the notes? Is it visible? Just a quick feedback on that. Okay, so in the last lecture we were here, and what we were doing is we were discussing the capacity of the spanning sets, and what we wanted was we wanted to approximate this equation by using multiple number of basis vectors which are f1, f2, and f alpha. And we also discussed that this approximation is only possible under following if following conditions are true, which are a, b, and c. The first point A is basically discussing the diversity. By diversity means how many number of spanning vectors that you will be incorporating in order to approximate this equation, and the number alpha of them, and not how many, how these vectors are independent of each other, like this f1, f2, and f3, all these vectors need to be independent of each other. So that is actually the diversity. And then we have how many number of them are there, like f1, f2, f3, f4, or f5, how many of them you are required to do it. So these two points, that is the first two, a and b, will define the capacity, or in fact I can remove this term capacity and can write complexity. So it's basically these two will define the complexity of the model that you are looking for. And the third point is how well the weights, that are the W1, WB, not WB, it's alpha. So how well these weights W1 to W alpha and theta, please note that this theta is also important. So how these two parameters are tuned is also actually affecting this approximation. So if these two parameters are not tuned very well, then the approximation will fail. So we have to see that, and that defines the optimization dial. So this shows you the capacity of the spanning set. As capacity of the spanning set increases, as the number of spanning vectors increases. So you can see that if you have only one vector, that is this side, you can see that this is only one vector, then the only way you can realize from this particular vector is the different realizations of this scaled along the x-axis. So you can see that there is no variation that you can observe in the xy plane. So only in x direction you can scale this basis vector. So as you increase the capacity from alpha equal to 1 to alpha equal to 2, now you can see we have another vector here in the y direction. So now there are different number of realizations that can occur in this plane. So you can see it's an xy plane. So how you can have multiple realizations of different vectors that can be realized in this particular plane. And similarly, if you have alpha equal to 3, you can have multiple realizations in a cube, which is a three-dimensional cube. So based on these basis vectors, as you increase the capacity of these basis vectors, the number of realizations of this vector will increase. And similar realization is for functions. So this is for vectors and this is for functions. So if you have a sine function, then you can have various sine realizations which can vary in terms of frequency. But if you have two sine functions like this, then you can have a slightly complex version of the sine function. As you can see, this is a complex version, whereas these are pure sine waves with different phase and frequency. But here you have a complex function realized, and the reason for that is because you have added two basis functions. And similarly here you have added three, so you can have more complex basis functions. So this shows you how increasing the spanning set of the vectors, you can increase the complexity and you can generalize more vectors. More vectors can be formulated by using the combination of these basis vectors. So now the important thing is, what are the different universal approximators that are available? So as you can recall that this is the model that we were discussing, that is m alpha x theta, where alpha is the capacity, that is alpha is running from alpha equal to 0, alpha equal to 1, alpha equal to 2. So as alpha increases, the number of number of terms increases. So for alpha equal to 1, we have only this term. For alpha equal to 2, we have this along with all these terms. So it increases. So as it is evident from this particular equation also. Whereas this theta, though I have written over here, but this theta is actually embedded in this f1x. and this theta is embedded in this f2x also. We will see when we will go more into this detail, but please note, when I am writing m alpha x theta means I am actually the theta I am referring, theta is a tunable parameter which is embedded in this particular functions, and to be precise it has to be m alpha x theta and w. I missed it out while I was writing the notes. Then I realized that it has to be theta comma w, and where w is this ones. So these are also tunable. So you have to keep this in mind that w's are also tunable, and the thetas which are embedded in this function are also tunable. So let us discuss the popular universal approximators. So the first popular universal approximator is that you have fixed shape functions, whereas in which you have polynomials, the one which you use normally, the polynomial regression that you use, this is the same thing. So here we are replacing all the f1x by x, f2x by x square, f3x by x cube. So once you do that, you immediately realize that you are actually implementing this equation. So this equation is already, it's a polynomial function which you can use for your regression and classification tasks. And one thing to note here is that I have replaced f1x with x and f2x with x square. So here in this particular example, it is independent of theta. So there are no thetas involved in this particular polynomial expression. So the tunable parameters in this case will be only w's, which are here. So these are the tunable parameters which you can tune to adjust to the, in the back propagation process. So you have to note that once you are doing polynomial regression, in polynomial regressions there are no thetas involved within this f1x. But when you move to some other complex approximators, their theta will come. So what are they? Let's discuss that also. But before going to that point, let me show you the sketchings for this. So this is the typical fx equal to x. This is x square, this is x cube, this is x to the power 4, and this is the same realization in 2 dimensions. So you can see in 2 dimensions we have this type of realizations. So what you do in polynomial regression, when you perform regression on any data set, so what you are doing is you are using these functions, which are very complex functions, to implement your regression tasks. So they are acting as your basis vectors. So they are acting as your basis functions rather, because we have already discussed here that these functions which are given over here, this is basically a typical sine function, but it will be replaced by all these basis functions which I have given over in the downside. So they will be acting as your basis functions now. And this is for 1 dimension and this is for 2 dimension. So once you combine these basis functions, then you can have a universal approximation theorem, which I discussed even in the simulations also in our earlier lecture. That will come to that neural network will actually approximate that any function using these basis functions. So because of this it happens. The second function that I am discussing over here, the function f, is parameterized with theta, and let me repeat this equation again. So here you have this equation. So in this now, this f1 x theta, now this you see that theta is coming, and this is tan hyperbolic theta 0 plus theta 1x, and f alpha x theta as tan hyperbolic this one. So this is a generalized alpha. Here I am taking a general term, but if you have f1x, then it is theta 0 plus theta 1 x1. So now you see how theta is coming inside this function. And if you realize that this tan hyperbolic theta 0 plus theta 1 x1 till theta alpha x alpha is nothing but a neural network, because you have this nonlinearity which is actually applied onto the summation. So this is basically the summation that you take. You know that this is something like W transpose X, right? So you are applying a nonlinearity on that. So it's a example of neural network, which is a parameterized function, and by parameterized means they are parameterized with theta. So now you see how neural networks are coming into play when you replace these f1x, f2x by neural networks. So this is the general function that that is used by either by the polynomial regression or by using or by neural networks. So similarly, you can see here, these are the realizations for different tan hyperbolics that I was discussing. So here you can see for n is equal to 1, we have different realizations, and these different realizations are offset by theta 0 and theta 1. So for different theta 0 and theta 1, you have offsets. Here offsetting is done by theta 0 as it is learned during the backpropagation. And same for n is equal to 2, we have theta 0 and theta 1, which we can vary. So you know these will be acting as the basis functions to approximate any complex function that you want your neural network to implement. So these are the basis functions that are used to do linear regression or classification tasks. Okay, so as I discussed about this f1x in more details, as you know that this can be either polynomial expression or this can also be a neural network. So based on this f1x can be either polynomial or neural network, you are weighting it by different weights that are w1, w1, w0, w2 and w alpha. So if you have that one, so the complexity of the model, by complexity I mean to say is you vary different alphas or with different thetas. No, only alphas. So depending upon the alphas, you are actually tuning the complexity of the model. So as you see, the dial is moving from left side to right side like this. So in the left side, when your complexity is minimum, that is alpha is only 1, that means alpha is 0, that means you are actually looking for W0 here. So it will be a straight line like this. I think it will be alpha equal to 1. So when alpha is equal to 1, you have these two terms. This one. So when these two terms are there, and if your f1x is, let us say, x, which is a polynomial regressor, which we are saying that f1x can be x and f2x will be x square. So in that case, it will be a line here. But as you increase your alpha gradually from alpha equal to 1 to alpha equal to 2 to alpha equal to 3 to alpha equal to 4, you can see how this particular curve which is given over here changes accordingly. And you can see how it is coming, how it is becoming such a complex function from this particular straight line. So this dial is actually showing you how you can tune your model, how you can tune this model by changing different alphas. So that alpha is actually the complexity dial. Okay, so we have basically two dials available with us. So one is the complexity dial, which is given over here, and we discussed it also here. So this is the complexity dial. The second is the optimization dial. And why we are saying we have two dials? The reason for this is, as you can see from this slide, which we had discussed earlier when we started this lecture, as I discussed here, that we have these two dials, right? One is this complexity dial, which is given over here. Another one is the optimization dial, which actually both will interact to generate the capacity, or both will interact to actually approximate this equation. So in order to approximate this equation, we need adjustment of both these dials. So that's why we need these two dials simultaneously adjusted so that you can get a proper fit to the model. So in this particular case, when the complexity of the dial is at the minimum, you can see this is the minimum complexity of the dial, then what you will expect from the model is that it will be a straight line, which is given over here. And please note that optimization dial, I have set it to extreme ends. That is, I am actually optimizing it to the full epochs. I am not stopping it at particular epoch, or I am not, the regularization parameter that I will use, I have selected it in such a way that it will actually generate this particular linear model. We will discuss about this regularization parameter in more details once we go into the further, later on these slides. But for time being, you can, as I am not discussing this completely, but you can understand that when I am optimizing it to the extreme ends means I am completely optimizing this model but the model that I am using is very simple. That's why it's a linear model which is completely fit over it. But when you move the complexity dial to the extreme ends here, and when you keep the optimization knob also to the extreme ends, then what you will get is the complete fit to any complex model also. So if you have a complex model which is given over here on this this color, then white line is actually approximating it. So basically you can see that as you increase the complexity, you can go for more complex models. Same thing is shown over here also. And this particular case is for the perfect data, which we have discussed earlier also, that perfect data is noiseless data, noiseless data, and it has abundance of data. So this is the case of perfect data where complexity dial, if we increase from the left to the right, it will actually fit this perfect data. Whereas in this case, if you have a real data, as it is indicated by fewer number of dots, and if you turn on the complexity dial from the left to right, again it will fit it properly. And please note that the optimization dial is set to the extremes. So any doubts still here? Okay, so now I want to show you, like, if you have a complexity dial which is set to the extremes, which is here, then if you turn on the dial of optimization from the left to right, how it is affecting the curve. So you will be surprised to see that even though the complexity dial is set to the extreme, you were expecting it to have a very complex function to realize. But here, if you see, if you are keeping the optimization dial on the left side, you are actually realizing this particular function. You can see that it's a flat line. But but as you move your optimization dial to this side, you are again creating something like this. And similarly on this side you will create something like this, and when your optimization dial is to the extremes, you are creating something like this. So we will discuss all this in our next slides, coming slides, but you can see that for this is actually lambda is very large here at this particular point. The regularization parameter that you are using here at this point is very large, but at this point lambda is very high, sorry, very small. So if lambda is very small, you will actually create a complex model like this. But when lambda is small, but when lambda is large, though you have a complex model, because you are selecting at this point a high complex polynomial regressor, a high complex polynomial function, but when your lambda is large, it will penalize that model and it will create a straight line like this. So that is the role of regularization that we will understand in more details in our coming slides. This is just a 10,000 feet overview of what regularization is actually doing to your model. So I will repeat once again that even if the model is complex, and if you tune the lambda, that is the regularization parameter, then that model will become a simpler model also, and that model can become a highly complex model also. So lambda plays a very important role in changing the complexity of the model. And this is showing you for the real data. Oh, sorry, for the for the real data, and this is for the perfect data. Same story. As you can see, the points are very less. So it is showing you that same story, that you are optimizing, but your capacity is high. Okay, so this plot which I am showing you over here is actually showing you the capacity for different values of alpha. Alpha equal to 1, alpha equal to 3, alpha equal to 10, and alpha equal to 20. So what I am doing is I am putting a polynomial fit to the real data which is given over here. And you can see when you are putting alpha equal to 1 means actually you are doing W0 plus W1x. So you are actually getting a linear line over here. But when you put alpha equal to 3, then you will have W2x square plus W3x cube also. So it will implement some curve like this. When alpha equal to 10, it will be like this. For alpha equal to 20, it will be like this. So you can see how you are varying alpha and how the curve is becoming so complex that it will try to fit each and every point of this data. Please note, at this particular point, this model is not covering all the points. Here it is covering some of the points. Here it is covering more than what is covered over here. These points are covered, this plot is covering more, and this is actually covering all the data points. You can see the curve is actually fitting all the data points here for alpha equal to 20. And if you use the neural network unit, which is the tan hyperbolic theta 0 plus theta 1x plus all that thing, which was actually I discussed fx, which I already discussed this. So if you use that one, in that case, if you are using alpha equal to 1, you will get this. For alpha equal to 3, you are getting this, this and this. So same story using different universal approximators. The first one is the polynomial, the second one is the neural networks. So you can see that you are observing that as you increase the alpha, it is actually touching all the points. Just a quick feedback. Are you able to hear my voice?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. Okay. Now the important thing will start from here. So as you can see, I am again showing you some curves. Here I am using alpha equal to 1. Here I am using alpha equal to 3, alpha equal to 10, alpha equal to 20. Same plot. But now I am plotting the cost function also along with that. By saying cost function means I am actually calculating the mean square error for all these points that are actually creating the mistake by not sitting on this particular line. So we are actually calculating the cumulative mean square error, and for this particular curve it is here. For this particular it is at this point, and for this particular fit it is at this point, and for this particular fit it is at this point. So when you plot all these errors, that is the training error that we will say, then it will become something like this. So as you can see, when you are fitting the data to the real data set, the training error is decreasing each and every epoch with each and every units. As you increase the units, the capacities, the training error is going down, down and down, and it's reaching up to this point. So the important observation that you can see from this figure is that training loss, which we have plotted over here, is not indicative of overfitting. We will discuss this in more details in the coming slides, but what I will tell you is this particular plot which you are seeing over here is actually the case of overfitting, and it's not desirable. So this overfitting, this training error which you are seeing over here is not indicating that. As you can see, training error is continuously going on decreasing, but this particular fit is not what we actually desire for, because it's a overfitting phenomena which we will discuss in more details in the coming slides. But for beer for me that this is actually not the perfect curve that we are looking for. So we want actually our error to show very high value here for this particular plot, but it is showing you a very low error. So this actually motivated the researchers to find out that what is, as we don't want this particular plot error to be 0, but it is showing us very close to 0. So we want some other metric to actually quantify this type of problem, that is to quantify overfitting, because we want our error to be very high in case of overfitting, but here it is very less. So we want any other metric that will help us in doing that. So this is the first motivation, that why we want some other metric to quantify our plots. This is in terms of the classification task. This is actually for regression task. This is the same story repeated in terms of the classification task, and you can see this is the very simple case of overfitting, and this is actually underfitting. We will discuss all these terms, but for timing you can understand that this curve is underfitting and this curve is overfitting, and these in between curves are varying in the complexity. as you increase the polynomial units from 2 to 5 to 9 to 20, and similarly for the neural networks also. So now the same story repeats here also. That is, if you implement a one layer neural network, or if you implement three layer neural network, or six layer neural network, what you observe is that the training error reduces at each and every point, for each and every, as you increase the complexity. But we do not want this particular curve error to be small. We want this particular error to be very high, not very small, because it is overfitting here. But our training error is not indicating that. So that is the reason why people were motivated to find out some other metric that can actually avoid all these type of situations where we have to come up with the indicative measure that can indicate, okay, this is the point where it is overfitting. So we have to come up with that type of metric. So in order to do that, we have a motivation for coming up with a new measurement tool. What is that new measurement tool and why we require it? As you can see, training error fails to indicate when the tuned model has sufficient complexity. As you can see here, as the complexity of the model is increasing, training error actually fails to indicate that. It is always giving you less and less and less error. But we want our model to give a higher error at the point where the complexity is becoming very high. So in that case, I am repeating this again. Here you can see it's a underfitting of the data. It is the overfitting of the data. As you can see, the complexity is very high, and this is the just right approximation of the data in case of polynomial regression. This is for classification. Same problem. So here we have overfitting. We want this type of situation not to occur because it is actually covering all the data points. We will see what problem we will have if all the data points are covered in our coming slides. But this situation we completely do not want, and we want our metric to actually figure out this, where it happens. And also for this case, which is underfitting. So both these situations are not good, and we want our metric to actually identify that. Whereas training error is not able to give us the complete picture. Okay, so what observations we have found out? The observations are that the overfitting and underfitting fails to adequately represents the underlying phenomena, that is generating our current data set. So basically our overfitting and underfitting situation that is happening, our model, the phenomena that is generating that overfitting and underfitting, the training error is not able to actually capture that. So here it is written that overfitting underfitting fails to adequately represent the underlying phenomena which generates our current data, and it fails to predict the labels for the new data generated by the same process. By saying the new data means if I put some different data which is we call as test data, so we want our model to predict that also correctly, but it fails to do that. So that is the important observation that we found out. Normally what happens is, there is some probability distribution px. In this data, the training and the testing samples have to actually come from this same probability distribution. So if the distribution, if the training error is not able to capture this distribution properly, then these type of things happen. So we have observed that training data is not able to capture this distribution completely. So we need something else to actually properly quantify this. So this is actually showing you a plot of overfitting. So here you see we have blue dots which are from one class, and
Sir,
yeah.
sir, by this new metric which we want to devise, we want to know to optimize.
No, your voice is breaking. Can you repeat again?
So by this new metric which we want to know where how what complexity should be of the model, or we want to know when to stop optimizing it.
Both of them are correct. Actually, we want to know the complexity also, and we want to see where we want to stop. You all these questions will be answered once I will go into more details. But yeah, that is right. We want to see how much complex model we want, because overfitting is actually giving you a very high complex model, and underfitting is giving you a very simplistic model. So we want to see which is the optimal model that is required, so that our losses are comparable. Okay. Okay. So here we have this training data set. Just a quick feedback. Can you hear my voice? Because I saw some, you know, some default voice came because of some disconnection.
Yes, sir.
Okay, okay, okay. So we have this training data set. So this is basically one class, and this is the second class, and this is the model. Maybe you can say it's a 10 level model, that is alpha equal to 10 or alpha equal to 15, something like that. But it's a polynomial model that we are using for this particular M alpha x theta. So as you can see, it is covering all the points. If you see here, it is covering all these points. It is going like this and covering all these points and classifying them correctly. So it has not left any one of them. So whatever class is of class 0, it is taking it as class 0, and what is of class 1, it is taking it as class 1. But what is the problem here? The problem here is, suppose if you have a testing data set like this, which is given over here. Let me highlight it. This one. So this is actually the testing data set, and it has to be 0 0 only. And why? Because this 0 0 is actually for this class. That's why it will be here at this point. Okay. And similarly, we have testing data sets for XX also, which is given over here. You can see uh, just this one. So these are x's, and the reason for that to appear here is very simple, because all these x's are here, so it will also appear somewhere here only. So now the problem is, because you have decided this as to be your over complex model, which is actually overfitting. So you can see that even uh, even for this case, uh, even for this case, though it is 0, but it will treat it as a x. And in this case, though it is as x, though these points are x, but it will be treated as 0, because the curve has actually overfitted it properly. So the overfitting complexity is actually misclassifying these test points. So that's why we don't want this type of over complex models, because these test points are to be properly classified as 0 and x, and not as x and 0. So everybody is clear with this? So that's why we want overfitting models to be avoided, because these outliers will then be, no, these properly testing samples will then become outliers. So we want to avoid that. So the important question that comes to our mind is that how to set these capacity and optimization dials, which we have discussed earlier, optimally, because there has to be some optimal point where our model will be properly fitting, and it will be a proper fit to the data set, like this. It is just right thing. So we want something like this, and how to adjust the capacity and the optimization dials properly, so that we will have a proper fit to the data. So let us discuss that today. The solution for this, that is to set these optimization and capacity dials optimally, is the validation error. We have to use validation error to do this task optimally. And what is validation error? Validation error is, unlike training error, a proper measurement. Please note, it's a proper measurement tool for detecting the quality of the model. So as we were discussing, as the student also asked, that what we actually want to achieve. So what we want to achieve is to determine the quality of the model, like which alpha you want, to properly fit that data and avoid overfitting or underbias against the underlying data generating phenomena we want to capture. So actually what happens is the training error is actually uh, some way or the other trying to approximate this data generating phenomena. So we want to actually focus our attention to the quality of the model, not onto the data generating process. So this is very important. So training error was not able to capture the quality of the model. It was only trying to approximate or minimizing the error onto the training data set. But in order to determine the quality, we have to devise some new measurement technique which we call as validation error. So there are different validation methods that are available. One is the naive cross validation technique, and it's also called as model selection or search. So this is the naive way of doing it. Then we have a cross validation via boosting technique. The third one is cross validation via regularization. So we will discuss all these three in very details and see how we can actually we will see each of these methods and we will understand what is the difference between them. And the last point, which is different from these 3 points, is the need for testing data set. Please note, I have not divided our data set into testing data set. What I am saying is, what I am advocating right now is you have to divide your complete data set into two parts. One is the training, another one is the validation. Right now I am doing that. I am creating a picture where training data set we have seen, it's not working fine. So what I am saying is let's create another data set which is the validation data set. So I am advocating that. But right now I am not advocating the testing data set. We will discuss the motivation behind this, like why we need to have a testing data set once we go through all these points. So once we understand all these three in details, then only we will be understanding that why we need another data set, which is the testing data set, which is somewhere here. So that is important. We want some other data set also, which we call as testing, but we do not want to discuss that until unless we feel a motivation for doing that. So let us discuss naive cross validation. So what is that? So what we do is we have this data set, which is a complete data set as we had earlier. And what we were doing is we were actually evaluating training error here on this data set. And we found that it is not able to capture the model capacity or model complexity. So in order to solve that problem, what we are doing now is we are actually dividing this data set into two parts. One is the training data set, another one is the validation data set. And this is actually a general statistics. That is, if the data set is small, like if it is of 100 or 1000 or 10,000 points, then the split is basically 70-30 ratio you can take in terms of the validation. But if the data set is more than 10,000 samples, then you can have 99% training data set and 1% validation data set. But if it is more than 1 million, then you can have this type of bifurcations. So this is a general trend depending upon your problem size. One important point that I want to discuss before going to this story of validation is, please read these lines very carefully. What it says is, okay, let me highlight it as I go. Larger or more representative a data set is, larger the portion of the original data may be assigned to the validation data set. So what it means is, if the data set is very representative, like each and every image is actually a representative of that data set, everything is good and fine, there is no problem in the data set, then what you can do is you can assign larger portion of the data set to the validation data set, then it's not a problem. Like in this division, if you have a data set which is very much representative of that particular phenomena, then you can put a larger data set as validation data set, and this is training. And what I mean to say is true phenomena. By true phenomena I mean to say is, if you have this, as I discussed, we have this probability distribution X, And please note, it's very important that the training and the testing samples should come from this same probability distribution. If they are not there, then problem will come. This is the inherent limitation of machine learning and deep learning techniques, that the probability distribution for both the training and the testing data set should be same. Otherwise, it will create problems in terms of the you know generalizing of the test data set. So what it is saying here is that if this the images which are present over here are actually a complete representation of this probability distribution, then you can try to bifurcate this into larger space, like you can have more validation samples. This amount is large. It can be like, earlier I was saying 70-30, you can take 50-50 also, if this is the situation. But if that is not the situation, then you have to take very small validation data set, not the large one.
Sir,
Yeah.
we lost you in the middle.
Oh, okay, okay. Now is now my voice is audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, okay. So what I was saying is this probability distribution. So all the images which are available here, which I am showing you here, if they actually represents this probability distribution properly, then you can have larger segmentation of the validation and training set. That is 50-50 ratio. You can take that. Even 40-60 also is possible. But if that is not the case, then your training data set has to be much higher compared to the validation data set. And a perfect example of that is, if you have this probability distribution Px and the images that you have here are noisy images. So if you have noisy or blurred images, blurred means some of the images are blurred, you cannot see them properly. So if that is the situation where images are noisy and blurred, then these images are not actually perfectly representing this Px properly. So in that type of situations, the training and test data set has to be 70-30 or even less. Like it has to be 80-20 or 90-10. As you go to this side, it will be better. So this you have to keep in mind. Depending upon your quality of the data set, you have to change the training and validation errors, training and validation data set. Is it okay? Any problem in understanding these lines? Okay. So now what we will discuss is the naive way of cross-validating the data set. So how we will do that is, I will define some terms here. So the first one we are calling as L superscript train subscript alpha theta. This is our training loss. And this L superscript val means validation, subscript alpha theta is our validation loss. So I am defining these two terms. Here alpha is the complexity of the model, which we have discussed in very much in detail in our earlier slides. Okay, and y is the true value that you have from the data set, and m is the model fit that we have also discussed. So if you want to create a alpha train theta loss, then how will you do that? You will write this equation. And here what you are doing, you are actually calculating the mean square error loss. This is the predicted value of the model and this is the true value. And you can see that I is running from 1 to m train and divided by m train. So basically m train plus m validation is the total samples that you have in the data set. Similarly, if you want to calculate the validation loss, it will be 1 divided by m validation and this one, and this is the predicted value from the neural network or from the polynomial expression, and this is the true value. So you are calculating that. So these are the two metrics that we will use. So if you are comfortable with this, so what I am writing here is a compact representation of the model M alpha. This is actually a compact representation of what we have discussed earlier. So what I am doing is I am writing it as M alpha xi, where I is the samples. As we have discussed this earlier also during the back propagation of the neural networks, this is the ith sample. So this is written like this, where W0 is the initial weight or initial bias W0, and then j is running from 1 to alpha, fj xi, then this is the expression. This is the compact expression. So if you write alpha equal to 1, it is actually this thing, only one term will be there. And if you write alpha equal to 2, we will have two terms. And as you move on till alpha equal to capital alpha, let us say, you will have so many multiple terms. So this is just a generalized expression for that. Okay, so one thing I want to say here is that though I have not written here, but actually this m alpha xi theta, here theta and w both should be there. I made a mistake while I was deriving this, or while I was writing all these things. It has to be a function of theta and w both. As you realized earlier also, during the optimization process, we indicated that these all parameters will also be tunable, and this theta is also tunable, and I have written it as fx, fj, xi, and this semicolon is applied over here with theta to indicate that this particular model f is actually tuned by this theta. That's why I have written like this. And this w0 till wj are also tunable. That's why it has to be actually m alpha xi. You can write it as, like, maybe some p, where p is actually a set of theta and w. So ideally it has to be something like this. But I made a mistake. So please note that wherever I am saying theta means, actually I am actually optimizing both theta and w. So the big picture, the 10,000 feet overview of what cross validation process is indicated here on this diagram. So you can see, as you are increasing the complexity. So first of all, let us say when alpha is equal to 1 means you have a simple model. Then you will have this particular model for that, and you can put that value here and get this value. So we are talking about this particular model which is given over here. So now what you have to do is, actually for this particular model, you have to actually optimize it. You have to optimize this particular model on training data set. That's why I am writing train here. So you please note, I am writing train here. And the reason for that is because I am actually minimizing, or I am doing the optimization on the training data set. And to be precise, it has to be theta 1 and w, theta 1 and w, theta and w, and theta and w. It has to be theta 1 w1, theta 2 w2, theta 3 w3, theta 4 w4, and the reason for that I have already discussed. So once you have this optimization process done, this optimization process is actually argmin. What it means is argmin of anything over alpha, let us say. And if this is actually having a alpha function, so what it means is argument that minimizes this particular expression L alpha over this particular alpha is basically the estimate. So this is actually coming from the field of optimization. What it is saying is, what argument, what value of alpha will minimize this particular expression, and that value will be alpha hat. So that is what is shown over here on these points, theta 1 2, theta 3 hat, theta 4 hat. Ideally it has to be w1 hat also here, w2 hat, and w3 hat, and some w4 hat, because w1, w vector and theta both are optimized. So now important point, please note, now you will evaluate on the validation loss. See, we have these validation samples. So you will be calculating the loss on the validation data set for different models, alpha equal to 1, alpha equal to 2, 3 and 4. But now the value of theta and w, actually it has to be w over here also. So the value of theta and w that you will use are the values that you are obtaining from this optimization process, which is given over here. So you have to use these values in evaluating this particular validation loss. So this is also w2 hat, and this is also here w3 hat, and for this it will be w4 hat. So based on the training data set, you have got the values of w1 and theta 1, which are the models parameters m alpha x theta, because m alpha x theta and w So you are actually optimizing this model. So once you have optimized this model based on theta and w, which you have obtained over here, now what you are doing is you are calculating the validation loss on these models. So you will have, here this is for M1, this is for M2, this is for M3, this is for M4. So based on the alpha equal to 1, 2, 3, and 4, you have 4 different models, and on these models you are calculating the validation loss separately for them. So once you have done this, then what is the value of the ideal validation loss, which we are calling as optimal, alpha opt. Alpha opt means the ideal optimization, ideal value of that model, which we have to find out. We are calling as alpha optimal. That will be minimization of minimize. Minimize means minimum of either of these terms. So whatever these terms are, we have to select the minimum value out of these. So once we select the minimum value out of these, that will give you the alpha optimal. So let us say for this particular example, if L3 validation theta 3 hat, and please note it will be W3 hat also here. So if this comes out to be minimum, then we will say alpha is equal to 3 is our best model. So basically, validation is actually acting as a model search algorithm. Model search. Because you are actually taking different models 1, 2, 3 till alpha, and then you are selecting the minimum value of the validation loss from there. So that shows you that validation loss is actually caring for the model selection, not for the data generation process error, which is taken care by the training loss. So this is actually showing you the actual plot for the validation versus the training error for a complexity. So as you can see, I am plotting here the complexity of the model. The complexity is here alpha equal to 1 and here alpha is equal to, let us say, 30. So as you are increasing the complexity, you can see this green curve which is given over here is the training loss. As we saw also earlier in our this slide, I'll just go back and show you. You can see this. As you can see here, as you increase the complexity, your training error is always going down. It is never coming up. So this is what is shown over here. As you can see over here, so this green curve is actually showing you that the training is always going down. But in case of validation loss, as you can see, after some value of alpha opt, this value actually goes up, whereas at this point it is going down. So the process is something like this. So each and every value of training, each and every value of this line is actually evaluating correspondingly. L3 actually is used to calculate this validation loss. So these all points are actually mapping. So whenever you take this point, at the same time you will evaluate this particular point. So all these points will be mapped together. So that's why there will be a point which is over here, which will actually give you the minimum or the optimal value of the model that will have very less validation loss, very less. So that's why we have a minimum point at this point, and we have to actually search for this point so that we can have a optimal model fit for that particular data set. Uh, yeah, you have any questions?
So yeah,
Yeah.
this optimal value of alpha that is independent from the initial weights and biases that we take in the model, right?
Yeah, it will be because you are anyhow doing the training, right? And you can see here
Yeah.
these weights every time they will be changing, and you will be doing the optimization to get these values, and then you will use these weights and biases to evaluate these validation loss.
Okay. So what does the amount of data, like if we have less amount of data, then could it
Can you repeat again? Your voice is breaking. Can you please speak again? Hello? Am I audible to everyone else? Can you repeat again?
Is it clear now?
Yeah, now it's clear. Yeah, please repeat.
Okay, so what I was asking is that if suppose we have less amount of data, like
Hmm.
only 400 or 300 samples, then
Hmm.
could it happen that on each run of calculating optimal alpha, we get a different value of, we get a different alpha? Like for one instance, we get alpha in the range of 10 to power minus 6, and for second run, we get the same alpha in the range of 10 to power minus 4 or something like that.
No, they see for the if you have a data set which is small, it again depends on this situation which I have discussed here, right? This point, like you have to see that how to bifurcate that data into a training and the validation loss. You have to be very proper in doing that, because for smaller data sets, it might be the case that the trainings images that you are taking in from that data set may not be the representation of the complete probability distribution that you are seeing. So based on that, it is, yeah, it is tunable, and alpha will change because of the size of the data set. And we will plot that points also, and we will discuss that curves also when when we will plot your training and the validation loss based on the size of the data set. As the size of the data set increases gradually, we will see that plots also where the validation and the training data set values will change. We will discuss all these points. Okay. Okay, so today I I think so already the class time is over. Yeah, any questions?
Yes, sir. So this graph which you have shown, this graph is for what level of optimization?
These graphs are for, like, you have to optimize it to the extreme ends. Right now, we are not discussing the optimization dial right now, but optimization we are considering it to be at the higher end. Like we want it to completely run to the situation where we are hitting the minima. Like
Okay,
the
thank you.
the epochs that you are using will be high. It's not that we are stopping in between. And the regularization parameter that we will use for this particular optimization strategy is, we are considering it to be a optimal one. We are not playing with lambda right now. We will play with the lambda and its corresponding curves in our coming lecture, where we will fix the complexity, and then we will tune the optimization dial and see how lambda can help us in achieving the results better. So it's like, two variables simultaneously you cannot play with. You have to fix one, and then once you fix that, and you play with the second one.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, so today's class I am ending over here. So what I have discussed is the naive way of cross validation. We will discuss more details and more insights to this graph which I am showing you here, and you will get more better picture as we will proceed further and further, and for today's class and day after today's class. And hopefully after the end of this lecture and tomorrow and the day after tomorrow's lecture, you will get a better picture of what is actually going on in this training, validation and testing situations. Okay, fine. So today's lecture is from my side over. So I guess if you don't have any questions, then we can leave the class.